What's up everybody, and welcome back to the channel that is everything military simulation, tactical shooter, and historic gaming. We're still giving away a postscriptum and beyond the wire key at the end of every week, so stay tuned for details on how to enter. If you play Hell Let Loose, unless you live under a rock, you know the Soviets are coming July 27th. But there's also something else to be excited about, and that is their complete armor overhaul. Let's talk about it. So the amazing devs at Black Matter that we love so much have been working very hard on an armor rework, the majority of which will be landing with Update 10. They've incorporated feedback from across the entire community, and it's meant reworking many areas of their code and logic, including both projectiles, armor, the way armor functions on the vehicles, and the componentry of each piece. Alongside this, it's also meant reworking the complex driving models for every vehicle in the game in order to get the best possible outcome that balances expectation with reality. There will also be changes to the base roster, ammo quantities, vehicle costs, sound effects, visual effects, and many more aspects, such as no longer allowing AT to reload a launcher while sprinting. In Hell Let Loose, armor is designed to function largely as it did in real life, with tense duels, surprise attacks from superior positioning, and requiring the support of the surrounding team, such as when it comes to protecting the flanks from an infantry attack. The largest rework by far is manually building and applying accurate armor hitboxes to all vehicles in the game. One of the large issues previously was projectiles would strike small pieces of geometry on the exterior of the vehicle, like a hook, spade, or edge, and it would lead to random outcomes, be it a bounce, non-penetrating explosion, or penetration. This led to very unsatisfying gameplay where some vehicles could be destroyed in a single shot, or some other totally random outcome. In reworking all of these hitboxes, we've now assured a very binary outcome that can both be learned and relied upon. We have found that this now produces better armored encounters in which crews are able to clearly understand the combat taking place. In line with the efforts towards eliminating the randomness of armored combat, they've reworked both the sound and look of penetrating shots, non-penetrating shots, ones that explode on the side of the vehicle, and ricocheting shots. They are now far more distinct and should help crews keep much better track of how the action is progressing. In addition, the tank shell flyby sounds have been greatly improved, leading to a more dramatic soundscape on the battlefield. In reworking the way resource nodes function and accumulate resources, we've rebalanced costs of vehicles to match. Our ultimate desire has always been to create relative scarcity of fuel that would then force a commander to make greater strategic decisions with their armor crews to decide which vehicle would be best to bring in to supplement the base roster of vehicles. Something we were missing from our Company of Heroes comparisons was a distinct battle order in which a commander would bring in a specific vehicle. We are keen that every decision the commander makes is driven by necessity and not by endless surplus. This is awesome. This means we're going to see a lot more medium tanks as they come into the game, and more of a scarcity of heavy tanks. Ultimately, the sight of a Tiger 1, a Jumbo, or an IS-1, and eventually coming to the game the Tiger 2, IS-2, and Pershing should be rare, exciting, and terrifying for the enemy. They're going to be adding an engine component, where the less potent forms of anti-tank weaponry can effectively hinder or nullify armor in ways that aren't a simple critical kill. It will be possible to knock out a vehicle's engine by penetrating the engine bay, resulting in its total immobilization. There's going to be a complete reworking of maneuverability and gears. No longer will a light vehicle be able to just push around a bigger vehicle. All the physics is getting reworked, reducing the likelihood of getting stuck between objects, reducing jittery behavior of vehicles while stationary or between objects, improve the ability for trucks to climb up steep angles, a complete rework of the sound effects. Now let's take a quick look at two new armored vehicles that the Soviet commanders will be able to field. The IS-1 was an early variant of the Soviet Stalin heavy tank. Developed from the battle-proven KV type, the KV was one of the most well-armored heavy tanks at its point of introduction, but by 1942 was vulnerable to experienced anti-tank teams in heavier German armor. In addition, it was slower, more expensive, and no more heavily armed than the now large numbers of T-34 tanks rolling off the production lines. The IS-1 performed well, but the T-34 would eventually be upgunned with the same 85mm gun. Thus, experiments to put increasingly larger guns in the IS hull would continue, and the definitive production variant would be the massive 122mm gun-armed IS-2. Again, the IS-2 coming to the Soviets at a much later update. Also coming with the launch of the game, or Update 10, the Soviet BA-10. It was a Soviet armored car from the Second World War, although a pre-war design, placing an armored hull over a Ford AA-derived chassis. The BA-10 had a somewhat ungainly appearance and a high center of gravity. It was armed with a 45mm gun, giving it excellent firepower for its weight. However, the B-10 found itself somewhat poorly suited to the rigors of Eastern Front combat. Its thin armor and high profile made it vulnerable to fire, and tracked vehicles proved to be better at traversing the poor roads that stretch across the Soviet Union. Where available, it would use its speed to serve as a reconnaissance vehicle instead. So as we all know, the Soviets are coming, and with them, Stalingrad, a beast of a map. Although this initial map is titled Stalingrad, it'll eventually be renamed as future maps are added that focus on different areas of Stalingrad, like train station, grain silo, etc. Now this first battle will focus on the Soviet push from the Volga up to the flour mill behind the famed Pavlov's house, a large fortified apartment building overlooking large stretches of the city. While Soviet forces push up the riverbank into the city towards a railway line, the German forces will begin in the higher suburbs above the city and push down into the flatter city remains. You'll find that Stalingrad is an interesting mix of spaced hardcover with wide roadways for vehicle movement through the bombed remains of the city. It also has significant vertical locations at the top of apartment buildings to dominate surrounding territory. It's definitely one of the most unique Hell Let Loose maps so far. Now, speaking of an armor overhaul, let's take a look at the Soviet infantry's anti-tank toolset, starting with the TM-35 mine. A simple square-hinged case filled with TNT, the fuse would release and detonate the mine when sufficient pressure was applied to the pressure plate. In Hell Let Loose, the TM-35 will serve as the key Russian anti-tank mine. Effective against all vehicles, the mine will serve as a backbone to close-quarters Russian anti-tank loadout. Simply place it in a discreet but well-trafficked location to knock out light vehicles and do significant, if not catastrophic, damage to heavily armored ones. Here we have the PTRS-41, one of the two Soviet anti-tank rifles used in World War II. The more complex of the pair, the PTRS was self-loading and was fed by 5-round in-block clips. It fired a specially designed 14.5mm armor-piercing cartridge with a tungsten or steel core. In Hell Let Loose, the PTRS will function as it did in reality, as a way to destroy smaller and lightly armored vehicles while also being able to disable the movement of larger ones. And it can also be used on organic targets with predictable effect, what I like to call the red mist. And finally, the ZIS-2, a high-velocity 57mm anti-tank gun of Soviet design, produced in large numbers to supplement the lighter 45mm anti-tank guns and more general-purpose 76mm field guns. The ZIS-22 was also occasionally mounted in vehicles to create a dedicated tank destroyer. The ZIS-2 will form the backbone of the famous Soviet defense in depth, rewarding preparation and setup while the nimble infantry units immobilize and isolate the heavier armor, making them soft targets for a prepared emplacement. Now, all of this, along with the armor overhaul, should make infantry vs. armor and armor vs. armor combat even more satisfying and rewarding for all involved. The Battle of Stalingrad was nearly a 6-month-long engagement on the Eastern Front. German High Command had pushed toward the River Volga in a bid to capture the strategic city, but found their progress slowed significantly once inside. One of the bloodiest battles of the war, Stalingrad alone accounted for more than 1 million combined casualties on both sides. As combat progressed from the suburbs into the industrial sectors, with constant Luftwaffe bombing turning many buildings into rubble. Unfortunately for the Germans, these bombed-out ruins were a perfect hiding place for ambushers and required savage room-to-room fighting to clear out. Soviet strategy was to fight the Germans as close in as possible, and as to limit their ability to use artillery or air support. Some larger buildings which managed to survive the constant shelling would be built as fortresses by the men who occupied them. One such building, known effectively as Pavlov's house, became famous for outstanding a 2-month siege while protecting the Russian-held Volga behind. Ultimately, the success of the Soviet operations in winter of 1942 would cut the German supply lines and leave the army surrounded in Stalingrad. The Germans continued to hold their portion of the city and attempted to break out toward friendly lines for another few months, but would eventually collapse and surrender from lack of supply in 1943. So as we all know now, the Soviets are coming in hot with the release of Hell Let Loose, coming out of early access July 27th. Now we're going to take a closer look at what they're bringing to play with. Starting with the Mosin Rifle, the main arm of the Soviet Union in the Second World War. A bolt-action rifle feeding from a 5-round single-stack magazine. It fired the powerful 7.62 by 54mm rimmed cartridge. The Mosin would prove to be durable enough for combat on the Eastern Front of both World Wars. Though the operating surfaces of the bolt were vulnerable to mud, while not exactly cheap to manufacture, the Soviet Union could field tens of millions numbers of the rifle due to their buildup of tooling machinery. The M91 was the original mass-produced variant of the Mosin, which served primarily in the First World War. The M91 was the longest of all the Mosins. Its rear sight was rushed into production following a change to the Spitzer ammunition in the early 1900s and was somewhat vulnerable to damage. The Mosin rifle was updated in form factor in the years preceding the Second World War. The handier 1891 Dragoon model was chosen as the basis of the 9130. Being a couple inches shorter than the original infantry model, the rear sight was also improved, and other than a few minor changes, the rest of the rifle remained the same. An even shorter version of the Mosin, the M38 carbine, was used by engineers, artillery crews, and other troops whose primary duties did not involve frontline combat. Lighter in weight but firing the same ammunition its full-size brethren. The M38's recoil was correspondingly higher. The second variant of the M9130, the sniper variant, had a scope mount on the side of the receiver which accepted either PEM or PU scopes. The bolt handle was bent 90 degrees to clear the scope. They were generally made with tighter tolerances and were capable of higher precision compared to the standard 9130. Discerning snipers would attempt to obtain ranging PZ ammunition which would explode on impact with the target. And finally, a lot of Red Orchestra players' favorite, the SVT-40. This was a Soviet semi-automatic rifle used extensively in World War II. A short stroke piston design, the SVT was one of the earliest self-loading rifles fielded in a significant quantity by a major army. It fed from a 10-round magazine and could be loaded with standard stripper clips. The SVT was intended to be mass-issued in large numbers, however the high casualties and equipment losses early in the war forced the rapid refitting of the Red Army, something the simpler Mosin was more suited to. The SVT would serve in a gradually diminishing capacity until production stopped in early 1945. The additional firepower provided was not seen to be worth the additional complexity at the time. Alright boys, I hope you are all as excited for the Eastern Front in this new armor rework as I am. Get ready, July 27th, boots on the ground, baby. I want to give a special shout out to my channel members. They make this all possible. They are my inspiration. For just $1 or a couple bucks or $10 a month, you could support this channel and get a few perks while you're at it. Some exclusive content. You can either click the blue join button below, or I have a Patreon link in the description if you'd like to help out support the channel. If you're not monetarily in position, I understand. Just keep liking and commenting like you guys are. I love each and every one of you. Also, all channel members get twice the entry for each weekly Steam Key giveaway. That's right, every week, your one entry then counts as 2 if you're a channel member. Now to join the giveaway, all you gotta do is like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and join our little Discord community, Boogie5 Gaming Etc. Discord channel. But most importantly, drop a comment on this video, and within the comment, say whatever you want, but leave your Discord name and number. That's gonna work as your ticket stub. Alright guys, I wish the best of luck to all of you. Again, thanks for the support, and I'll see you in the next one.